What if one quiet act, giving up a seat on a plane, could spark a global movement, unite two unlikely leaders, and change the lives of thousands of young girls across continents? This isn't fiction. It happened, and by the end of this story, you'll see why the most powerful moments often begin in silence. Stay with us, because what unfolds next might just change how you see leadership forever. Dear friends, what you're about to hear is more than just a story. It's a glimpse into a world where quiet courage reshapes destinies and dignity outshines power. These are the voices often missed by the headlines, but not here. If this kind of storytelling moves you, if it stays with you long after the screen fades, we invite you to subscribe and ring the bell. And before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We read every word. Now let's begin. The terminal at Charles de Gaulle Airport buzzed with the usual rhythm of early morning travel. Suitcases rolled, announcements crackled, and travelers moved in a blur of routine. Among them stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, fresh off a red-eye from D.C., adjusting the sleeve of her navy blazer as she approached the first-class boarding lane for Flight 341, bound for Geneva. She was scheduled to speak at the Global Human Rights Summit, a stage reserved for the most uncompromising voices in international policy. But what happened next would redefine everything. Not her speech, not the summit, but a single decision she made before the plane even left the ground. As Jasmine handed her ticket to the gate agent, a subtle tension pulled her gaze toward the economy check-in counter nearby. A tall man in a muted green caftan, dignified, calm, and seemingly unaffected by the mounting frustration around him, was quietly arguing with an airline employee. His voice was low, firm. "I was assured by the embassy this booking was confirmed," he said. But the agent barely looked up. "Your name doesn't match the manifest, sir," she replied curtly, tapping away on her screen. The man held up a worn diplomatic passport, but it was dismissed without ceremony. Travelers passed by without a second glance. To most, he looked like another foreign official lost in the maze of international travel bureaucracy. But Jasmine saw something different, an unmistakable self-possession in his posture, a deliberate grace in how he refused to raise his voice, even as he was being quietly erased. It wasn't pity that made her stop. It was recognition. A kind of kinship born not of identity but of principle. Without asking anyone for permission, she stepped out of line. "Excuse me," Jasmine said to the agent. "If he needs a seat, he can have mine." The woman blinked. "Ma'am, that's a first-class seat." Jasmine didn't hesitate. "And I'm not too fragile for coach." Before anyone could object, she handed over her boarding pass, nodded to the man, and turned away. She didn't know his name. She didn't ask for his story. All she knew was that something felt deeply right about giving up that seat. As she walked toward the economy gate, dragging her small suitcase behind her, she had no idea that the man she had just lifted from indignity to dignity was Ibrahim Traoré, the sitting president of Burkina Faso, traveling under diplomatic discretion. She couldn't have known that this moment would ripple far beyond the aisles of Flight 341, reaching the halls of the United Nations and the hearts of millions. All she knew was this. Sometimes the smallest decision, quiet, unseen, and made without expectation, becomes the spark that changes everything. Jasmine Crockett settled into her narrow economy seat with the quiet ease of someone who had long since stopped chasing comfort. She didn't flinch at the tight legroom, didn't grimace at the recline that wouldn't budge. Some things, she believed, were bigger than convenience. She pulled out her notebook, flipped to a half-filled page of handwritten ideas, and tried to focus on the speech she would deliver in Geneva. But something lingered. That man, his posture, his composure. The way he had accepted her gesture with a nod, not entitlement. Like someone who understood gratitude but wasn't surprised by dignity. Beside her, a young man in a NYU sweatshirt tapped politely on her arm. "I just wanted to say," he began nervously, "what you did back there, that was incredible." His name was Elijah, a political science student from Kenya. As they struck up conversation, the topic quickly shifted from casual to compelling. Jasmine asked about his thesis. Elijah lit up, speaking with conviction about African sovereignty, post-colonial narratives, and the handful of leaders still brave enough to challenge the world order. "There's one man I admire most," Elijah said. "President Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso. He's shutting down foreign military bases, redirecting international loans into public education. Not perfect, but he's the first to act like Africa doesn't need saving." Jasmine froze. The name hit like an aftershock. "Wait, Traoré?" she asked. "Isn't he the one who was supposed to attend this summit anonymously?" Elijah nodded. "Yeah, security risks. There were rumors he'd be flying under diplomatic discretion." Her pulse quickened. She glanced down the aisle toward first class, now hidden behind a thick grey curtain. That couldn't be him, could it? Just then, a flight attendant approached her seat with a folded napkin. "Ma'am, someone in first class asked me to give you this." Confused, Jasmine unfolded it. 4 simple words stared back at her in flowing script. "Merci pour votre dignité. Président I. Traoré." The breath caught in her throat. She looked at Elijah, eyes wide. "That's him," she whispered. He had known. The man she had helped, without pretense, without recognition, was one of the most controversial, defiant voices in modern African politics. And now he knew her name too. In seat 2A, Ibrahim Traoré leaned back against the headrest, eyes closed but mind racing. He had met world leaders with power, but rarely with principle, and never one who gave without knowing who stood before them. He didn't believe in coincidence, not anymore. Their paths hadn't crossed by chance, not today, not on this flight. Something larger had just begun. Roughly 3 hours into the flight, somewhere above the Atlantic, the cabin had fallen into a soft hush. The overhead lights dimmed to a gentle amber. Passengers dozed off with headphones half in, novels open but unread. Jasmine Crockett sat alert, her thoughts still tangled in the revelation she'd received. Her act of kindness had touched a man the world debated daily. Yet even that profound realization couldn't prepare her for what came next. Without warning, the plane jolted. Not a gentle bump, but a violent lurch to the left that sent seatbacks creaking and plastic trays snapping shut. A ripple of startled gasps moved through the cabin. Jasmine gripped the armrests, instinctively scanning the aisle. Another jolt came, harder. Coffee spilled, a glass shattered. Somewhere, a child began to cry. The captain's voice crackled overhead, tense but controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering severe turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts immediately and remain seated." But then came the sound that pierced through everything, a low moan. Jasmine turned quickly. An elderly man 2 rows behind her was slumped forward, motionless. His wife shook his shoulder, her voice rising in panic. "Henry! Henry!" The air thickened. Jasmine's instincts overrode every protocol. She unbuckled, moved toward him. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. His skin had gone pale, his chest frighteningly still. "I need the defibrillator, now," she said to the nearest attendant. There was no hesitation in her voice. It was the voice of command, of someone who had led, not just spoken. A crew member rushed toward the galley. Passengers leaned out of their seats, but Jasmine blocked them out. She laid the man gently across the row, checking his pulse. Nothing. In first class, Ibrahim Traoré rose to his feet, eyes scanning. He saw her, kneeling, working, without fear, without fanfare, just doing what needed to be done. He moved toward the curtain, but didn't interfere. Sometimes power meant knowing when not to speak. The medkit arrived. Jasmine's hands moved with practiced precision, attaching the AED pads, beginning compressions in rhythm. "Clear," she said, pressing the button. The man's body jerked. Nothing. She resumed. Another shock. Then a cough, a weak, rasping breath. The cabin erupted, not in chaos, but in awe. Applause broke out. A few passengers sobbed. The man's wife clutched Jasmine's hand, whispering blessings through her tears. Jasmine sat back on her heels, sweat on her brow, breathing hard. Traoré stepped forward then quietly, watching her. Their eyes met, not in politics, not in titles, but in recognition. Not everyone who leads does it on a podium. Some lead on instinct, in motion, under pressure. "You were trained," he said softly. "A long time ago," she replied. "But you remember when it counts." Above the ocean, in the fragile silence that followed, something deeper than diplomacy passed between them. It wasn't a crisis anymore. It was clarity. The wheels of Flight 341 touched down in Geneva just after sunrise, but the glow that filled the cabin wasn't only from the soft Swiss light spilling through the windows. It was from something intangible, a current of energy, a shared recognition that everyone on board had just lived through more than turbulence. The emergency had passed, the man in row 18 was stable, and the aircraft taxied slowly toward the private diplomatic terminal. But for Jasmine Crockett, seated near the back, a deeper unease settled into her chest. Not anxiety, expectation. As if something else was still waiting to be revealed. Elijah, the student next to her, leaned forward, peering through the window. "That's a full security detail," he whispered. "Media vans, that's for a head of state." Jasmine nodded, only half surprised. She had pieced it all together now. Traoré's anonymity, the whispered respect from crew members in first class, and the folded napkin that had shifted her entire perspective mid-air. An announcement came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have on board a distinguished guest. Please remain seated as we accommodate his departure." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Murmurs followed. "Is that the president of Burkina Faso?" someone whispered. "The one who challenged the IMF." Traoré stood slowly. The plane fell into a hush. He adjusted his collar, nodded briefly to his team, and instead of exiting toward the first-class jet bridge, he turned toward coach, toward Jasmine. Every step he took down the aisle drew more eyes, more held breaths. When he reached her row, he stopped and extended his hand. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, his voice low but deliberate, "would you do me the honor of walking off this plane with me?" Time paused. Jasmine blinked, stunned not just by the offer, but by its weight. She rose slowly, meeting his gaze. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady. They walked together, side by side, through the jet bridge into a wall of flashing cameras and shouted questions. But they didn't stop. They didn't pose. They moved with purpose until they reached the podium, awaiting them just outside the terminal. Reporters jostled, trying to make sense of the moment. A president known for isolationism and anti-imperial rhetoric, and a U.S. congresswoman known for grilling officials on live television, now united by something unscripted. Traoré stepped to the microphone. "This woman gave up her first-class seat without knowing who I was. Then, when life quite literally hung in the balance, she rose and saved it. Not because it was her duty, because it was right. And that is the kind of leadership the world forgets until it stares us in the face. He turned to Jasmine and smiled. This is not politics, this is truth. And from it, we will build something real. A week later, the world still hadn't stopped talking. Clips of Jasmine Crockett walking beside President Ibrahim Traoré flooded news channels and social media feeds. The moment had gone viral, not because of spectacle, but because of sincerity. People weren't celebrating politics, they were celebrating principle. And that perhaps was the most unexpected twist of all. In classrooms across Nairobi and New Orleans, teachers played the footage and asked their students to reflect. In cafes from Ouagadougou to Oakland, conversations about dignity, leadership, and unexpected unity unfolded over coffee and Wi-Fi. And at the United Nations General Assembly Hall in New York, a room that had heard 1,000 promises heard something different. President Traoré stepped forward to the podium, but this time he didn't speak only of policy. His voice was softer, more personal. In a moment when no one was watching, or so she thought, Congresswoman Crockett gave up her comfort for a stranger. Then she gave her strength to save another's life. Not for applause, not for power, but for principle. So today we begin something lasting. He paused as a screen behind him revealed the logo of a new initiative, the First Seat Project, a continent-wide plan to build 100 education centers for young women across West Africa, designed to offer not just academic opportunity, but leadership development, civic empowerment, and mental wellness support. Each center would carry Jasmine's name. Jasmine sat motionless, her breath caught. She had known about the collaboration. She had signed off on the strategy. But she hadn't known this, hadn't expected her name etched in the hearts of the very girls she'd hoped to uplift quietly from behind the scenes. She rose to speak, and the room fell silent. "When I gave up my seat, I didn't think it mattered," she said, steady but visibly moved. "I wasn't making a statement, I was just being human. But I've since learned that humanity is a statement. Every small act is a vote for the world we want." Her voice grew stronger. A seat on a plane became a seat at the table, and now for thousands of girls it's becoming a seat in the classroom. That's the power of what we choose when no one is clapping. The room rose in standing ovation, not for celebrity, not for a political win, but for the reminder that integrity still moves people and movements. Later that night, Jasmine posted a short video from her hotel room. Just her, no lights, no script. "I didn't ask for the spotlight," she said, "but maybe it found me for a reason. Now I'm asking you, what's your first seat moment? That one quiet choice that changed someone's day, maybe even their future. Share it, tell it, because the world needs more of those." Some stories don't need embellishment to feel extraordinary. Jasmine Crockett's journey began not with a spotlight, but with a simple gesture, giving up her first-class seat to a man she didn't know. That decision, unplanned and unpublicized, set in motion a chain of events that no one on Flight 341 could have predicted. She wasn't trying to make history, but history, it seems, was waiting for her. From her quiet sacrifice emerged something rare, a genuine moment of cross-cultural recognition. When Jasmine found herself treating a medical emergency mid-air, she acted on instinct and compassion, not political training. And when President Ibrahim Traoré stepped off that plane beside her, it wasn't an endorsement, it was acknowledgement. Two leaders, one from West Africa, the other from the halls of Capitol Hill, met in a space neither controlled, an airplane aisle, and created a story the world couldn't ignore. Their collaboration didn't stop at headlines. It became a movement. The First Seat project, now building education centres across West Africa, will lift up thousands of young women who may never hear Jasmine's name, but will carry her courage in the opportunities they receive. So what do we take from this? That real leadership rarely announces itself. That kindness done without cameras watching is often the kind that echoes the loudest. That power, when rooted in service rather than status, inspires change far beyond borders. And most importantly, that every one of us is just one moment away from making a choice that could reshape someone's world. We don't need to be in politics, we don't need wealth or titles. We only need to act when it matters most. Now it's your turn. Question: what made Jasmine's action truly powerful? A. She was already a public figure, so people noticed. B. She acted without knowing who he was and expected nothing in return. Comment your answer below. A or B, then tell us, have you ever witnessed a quiet act of kindness that changed your day or someone else's? Have you ever made a small decision that had unexpected impact? Share your first seat moment in the comments so others can be inspired too. And if this story moved you, subscribe to our channel. We've got more powerful human stories coming, stories that remind us that leadership, like kindness, is a choice we can all make.